when God told Abraham to kill his son and then changed the plan according to the Bible. There are moments in Scripture that don't ask for your opinion, they demand your attention. Stories that don't just speak to your heart, but stop it for a second. This is one of them. A father, a son, a mountain, a knife. When we read about God asking Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, we aren't reading a fairy tale with a clean moral. We're staring straight into a scene so intense, so sacred, it makes us want to whisper. It's not a story we casually share in Sunday school. It's not something we toss into our devotionals to feel encouraged. It is raw, it is terrifying, and somehow it is beautiful, because it asks a question most of us avoid. What do you do when obedience feels like betrayal? When God, the same God who gave you a promise, asks you to walk straight toward what looks like the death of it? It's a story filled with silence. Abraham doesn't argue, Isaac doesn't protest, and God doesn't explain, not until the very last second. That silence is where faith either shatters or matures. This isn't just about an old man and his long-awaited son. This is about you. It's about what you hold dearest. It's about the promises you've built your life around, the dreams you've prayed for, the people you'd do anything to protect. And then suddenly, one day, God touches that very thing and says, "Give it to me." No warning, no clarity, just a test. And the test isn't about cruelty. It's about worship. It's about trust. It's about who holds the knife and who holds your heart. For thousands of years, believers have stood at the foot of that mountain with Abraham, trembling, wondering how far faith is supposed to go. But what if the story isn't really about the sacrifice? What if it's about the one who stopped it? Because just when the knife was lifted, just when the boy was bound, and the wood prepared, heaven interrupted. A voice called out, a ram appeared, and a new name for God was revealed, Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides. So today, we're not just revisiting a story, we're walking up the mountain ourselves. We're asking the hard questions, we're wrestling with the silence, and we're listening for the voice that still speaks when it matters most. This is the kind of story that doesn't end at the altar, it ends at the cross. But first we go to Moriah. It happened without warning, after all the years of waiting, after the miracle that turned Sarah's laughter into life, after Isaac, this boy of promise, had begun to grow, to speak, to laugh, to ask questions about stars and sheep and God. The call came. It was abrupt, jarring, a command, not a conversation. Abraham, the voice that once called him out of Ur, the voice that promised descendants like the stars, that same voice now said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." There's no room for misunderstanding here, no vague metaphors, no symbolic dreams. This wasn't a test of theory, it was a test of trust, and it struck directly at Abraham's greatest joy. Isaac wasn't just his son, he was the embodiment of everything God had promised. Abraham had believed through impossibility. He had trusted through barrenness. Now, after years of walking with God, he's told to lay that very promise on the altar and end it with his own hands. And still, no argument, no rebuttal, no questions, no why, not even a plea. Just silence, a silence that's heavier than thunder, because Abraham knew this voice. He recognized the weight of divine instruction. And somewhere, deep beneath the shock, was something more dangerous than doubt: obedience. So early the next morning, before the sun had even broken the horizon, he saddled the donkey. He gathered the wood. He took to servants, and he brought Isaac. And that's when the real journey began. 3 days. That's how long it took to walk from where they were to the mountain where everything might end. 3 days of silence. 3 days of stolen glances at his son. 3 days of wondering whether the voice would speak again. It's one thing to obey in the moment of command. It's another to carry that obedience step by step, mile by mile, heartbeat by heartbeat, without explanation or comfort. We don't know what Abraham thought, but we know what he did. He walked with each step. He said no to reason, no to fear, no to the natural instinct of a father to protect his son. With each step, he chose trust, not blind faith, but bleeding faith, the kind that walks with tears in its eyes. Isaac was old enough to carry the wood. He was strong. He was alert. He was aware enough to notice something was missing. "Father," he said, "the fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham, still walking, still trusting, gave one of the most prophetic answers in all of Scripture. God himself will provide the lamb. He didn't say it to avoid suspicion. He said it because he believed it, somehow. He didn't know how, but something in his soul clung to the nature of God more tightly than the clarity of the situation. This wasn't just a test of action. It was a test of perception. Could Abraham believe that the God who gives could still be trusted when he seems to take away? At last, they reached the mountain. There were no signs from heaven, no angels, no flashes of divine interruption, just the sound of Isaac's breathing and the distant echo of servants waiting at the base. And then, the wood was arranged, the boy was bound. And Abraham lifted the knife. At the highest point of the test, when the knife was raised, when the muscles tensed, when all of heaven seemed to hold its breath, God broke the silence. "Abraham, Abraham." It was urgent, it was sharp, it was immediate. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," the voice said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Can you imagine the sound of that knife lowering, the collapse of Abraham's shoulders, the rush of breath that must have come after holding it for what felt like eternity? There, caught in a thicket nearby, was a ram, not just a replacement, a provision. At the very place where Abraham was willing to surrender everything, God provided what was needed. But let's not miss what happened here. This wasn't just about a ram. This was about a God who sees the end from the beginning, a God who tests not to torment, but to refine, a God who sometimes waits until the last possible second, not to torture us but to see if our hearts are truly his. And Isaac, he saw it all. He saw the altar, he felt the ropes, he saw his father's trembling hands and heard the voice from heaven. That moment didn't just change Abraham, it shaped Isaac's understanding of God forever, because what he saw wasn't cruelty, it was mercy. What he felt wasn't abandonment, it was divine presence in the most terrifying place of all. We often want God to act quickly, to rescue us, before the test begins. But sometimes he lets the knife rise because he wants to reveal something deeper. That even when all seems lost, he's still in control, and he will provide. Always. When Abraham looked up and saw the ram caught in the thicket, it wasn't just relief, it was revelation. He named that place Yahweh Jireh, or Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. This wasn't a name chosen lightly, it came from the kind of encounter that leaves your soul permanently altered. This wasn't the God of theory anymore. This was the God who met him on the mountain, the God who asked for everything and then gave back more than Abraham could have imagined. But let's look closer. God didn't provide until Abraham surrendered. He didn't send the ram at the beginning of the journey. He didn't interrupt the night before, or on day 2, or even while Abraham was building the altar. He waited until Abraham had placed the most precious thing in his life on the line. Because the provision of God often flows through the channel of surrender. Not just physical surrender, but the surrender of certainty, of security, of self. Abraham's obedience wasn't transactional, it was relational. He didn't follow God because he had guarantees. He followed because he knew the giver. Even when he didn't understand the gift, he believed that God could raise the dead if needed. He trusted that God's character was still good, even when his commands seemed unbearable. And in that place, something eternal broke through. The ram became more than an animal. It became a picture, a shadow of something greater. Because one day, on another hill not far from Moriah, another son would carry wood on his back. He too would be the only son, the one whom the Father loved. But this time, there would be no substitute, no ram, no voice to stop the knife. Jesus was the lamb, the sacrifice, the fulfillment. When Abraham said, "God will provide the lamb," he was speaking more truth than he realized. The same God who stayed Abraham's hand would not stay his own. He would offer up his son for us all. So Jehovah Jireh doesn't just mean God provides stuff. It means God provides salvation. He provides what we could never earn. He supplies what we could never demand. And he often does it in places where we thought only grief could grow. Because Moriah teaches us something few places can. That the altar is not the end, it's the beginning. That surrender doesn't kill your destiny, it unlocks it. That sometimes God brings you to the edge of loss not to destroy you, but to reveal Himself in a way you never could have known otherwise. He is the God who provides, not always what you expect, not always when you want, but always exactly what you need. At the end of this story, Abraham walked down the mountain with his son alive by his side, his heart fuller than when he went up, but he was not the same man who had climbed it. He had seen God in a deeper way, not just as the promise maker, but as the sustainer, the provider, the one who doesn't flinch at sacrifice, because he himself would one day make the ultimate one. And Isaac, he would carry this moment forever, not just the memory of ropes and firewood, but the image of a God who intervenes, a God who sees, a God who provides. But this story wasn't written just for Abraham or Isaac. It was written for every one of us who's ever stood at the base of our own Moriah, for every believer who's ever had to carry wood uphill, wondering what God is doing, for every parent who's had to trust God with their child, for every dream that felt like it had to die before resurrection could come. It reminds us that sometimes God asks us to give back to Him the very thing He gave us, not because He wants to take it away, but because He wants to give it back on different terms: sanctified, surrendered, secure in His hands. It teaches us that faith isn't just about believing in the promise. It's about believing in the promiser, even when He walks us into the unknown. So if you're standing on the mountain right now, if your heart is trembling and your hands are empty, know this: the God of Abraham is still your God. He still provides, He still speaks, and He still shows up right on time. He is Jehovah Jireh, not just in the story, not just in theory, but here, today, for you.